At 71, Thomas Hollywood Henderson looks back with a mix of pride and regret. Once the most flamboyant linebacker in the NFL, he was a man who seemed untouchable, draped in silk suits, speeding through Dallas nights, and calling himself the new face of America's team. Yet behind the bright lights and magazine covers lived a truth far darker. Henderson was a star who held the Cowboys' future in his hands, but cocaine and ego dragged him into chaos. What began as swagger turned into scandal, and what looked like charisma became a mask hiding a storm. He was adored by fans, feared by quarterbacks, and envied by teammates. But the more the spotlight grew, the more the shadows followed him. Henderson became known not just for tackles, but for taunts. Not just for speed, but for spirals into self-destruction. His journey is not the story of a single bad night or one mistake. It is the story of 5 hidden truths that defined a man, truths he only dares to admit decades later, when the crowds are gone and the echoes of Texas Stadium have faded. Why would one of the most gifted linebackers of his generation throw it all away? Why did he turn his greatest gift into his greatest curse? And how did the Cowboys' rising star transform into a cautionary tale? Tonight, we uncover the hidden truths of Thomas Hollywood Henderson, the linebacker who lived too fast, flew too high, and nearly lost it all. Thomas Henderson was not born into the spotlight. He came from the rough streets of Austin, Texas, a place where survival was not guaranteed, and dreams often burned out before they began. Yet his talent was unmistakable. Speed, size, and raw instinct made him a natural force on the field. By the mid-1970s, he had risen from a troubled youth to a college standout, and the Dallas Cowboys saw in him a chance to redefine their defense. They called him Hollywood because of his style, but behind the nickname was a man trying to outrun the past. On the field, Henderson was electric. He had the rare ability to cover wide receivers as a linebacker, a skill that changed the Cowboys' playbook. He made quarterbacks hesitate, and wideouts dread the middle of the field. To the fans, he was everything the Cowboys wanted to project, a perfect blend of toughness and glamour. Dallas was already America's team, and Henderson seemed like its most dazzling star. He wore expensive clothes, drove luxury cars, and played with a swagger that drew cameras his way. But the NFL of the 1970s was not just about talent. It was an era of discipline, under coaches like Tom Landry, a man of faith, order, and rigid control. Landry demanded silence, obedience, and sacrifice. Henderson embodied the opposite, a free spirit who loved attention, who partied as hard as he practiced, who believed rules were made for others. The clash between coach and player was inevitable. What Landry saw as distraction, Henderson called expression. What Landry viewed as disrespect, Henderson believed was his destiny. The Cowboys' locker room became a stage for this struggle. Some teammates admired his confidence, while others saw recklessness that threatened the team's unity. Every practice, every game, Henderson had a choice: to fall in line, or to live the life he believed he deserved. More often than not, he chose the second path. His brilliance on the field made him indispensable, but his behavior off it made him dangerous. Cocaine and late nights became part of his story, and whispers began to follow him. Dallas had built an empire on discipline and control, and Henderson represented both its brightest light and its darkest risk. This was the foundation of his journey. A man caught between two worlds, glory and ruin, order and chaos. He was not simply another linebacker. He was a symbol of what could happen when talent and temptation collide inside the pressure cooker of professional football. Henderson's career would not be remembered for just interceptions or tackles. It would be remembered for the hidden truths, the moments when his ambition, addictions, and arrogance shaped not only his destiny, but the very image of America's team. #5. Hollywood versus Tom Landry. The first hidden truth of Thomas Henderson's career was his war with discipline itself, personified by Tom Landry. Landry was no ordinary coach. He was the face of structure, a man who wore a fedora on the sideline, like a crown of authority, a man who believed in silence, order, and absolute control. Henderson, meanwhile, was the opposite. He was flash, noise, and improvisation. Their relationship would become one of the most combustible in Cowboys history. From the beginning, Landry admired Henderson's athletic gifts. Few linebackers in the 1970s could run like him, cover like him, or intimidate opponents in open space. Landry designed special roles just for him, unleashing Henderson in coverage where others would have crumbled. Yet talent without obedience was a danger, and Landry knew it. Henderson didn't just challenge plays, he challenged authority itself. He walked into practices with music blasting. He strutted into team meetings late. He wore the Hollywood image as a badge. And every bit of swagger chipped away at Landry's patience. The conflict became clear in 1978, when Henderson openly mocked the coach's conservative style. He told reporters that Landry was too rigid, too old-fashioned, that his methods belonged to another era. For Landry, a man who valued dignity above everything, this was betrayal. For Henderson, it was honesty. A chance to remind the world that he was bigger than the system. The locker room divided. Some whispered that Landry had lost control. Others feared that Henderson's arrogance could cost them championships. The iconic clash came during a Monday Night Football broadcast in 1979. Henderson, high on cocaine, taunted Terry Bradshaw on national television, calling him dumb, mocking the Steelers, and by extension mocking Landry's teachings of humility and respect. It was not just a moment of bravado, it was a public humiliation for Landry, proof that Henderson was no longer a controllable force. For a coach who valued loyalty and discretion, seeing his linebacker unravel in front of the nation was unforgivable. Landry's response was swift but cold. Henderson found himself benched, fined, and eventually cut. The coach who had once believed he could mold Henderson into the perfect linebacker, now believed he had no choice but to let him go. The Cowboys' dynasty was built on unity, and Hollywood had become a crack in the foundation. Landry's silence spoke louder than any words. The man who prided himself on discipline had finally drawn the line. For Henderson, the moment cut deep. Years later he admitted that he loved Landry, but could never live under him. He saw the coach as a father figure, and yet he spent most of his career rebelling against that authority. It was a truth that defined him. Henderson never conquered Landry, and Landry never saved Henderson. Their relationship was a portrait of football's eternal conflict. Freedom versus order. Glamour versus grit. Cold truth. Henderson never forgave the way Landry silenced his rise. Landry never forgave the way Henderson mocked his crown. The grudge lived on, long after the cheers faded from Texas Stadium. #4. Hollywood versus Roger Staubach. The next hidden truth was his uneasy rivalry with the most beloved cowboy of them all, Roger Staubach. To America, Staubach was Captain America, a Navy veteran, devout, disciplined, and a leader who embodied everything Tom Landry demanded. To Henderson, Staubach was the reminder that the Cowboys' culture belonged to the clean-cut, all-American image, not to the rebels who wanted to live loud. Their clash wasn't just about football, it was about identity. Henderson respected Staubach's toughness on the field. The quarterback took brutal hits, stood tall in the pocket, and brought the Cowboys back from the brink, time after time. But off the field, Henderson bristled at Staubach's straight-laced ways. While Staubach stayed home with his family, Henderson prowled Dallas nightlife. While Staubach prayed before games, Henderson partied the night before. In the locker room, that divide was impossible to hide. Staubach represented order and virtue. Henderson represented chaos and glamour. The tension between them was a quiet war within the team. The breaking point came during the 1978 season. Henderson, fueled by cocaine and ego, began mocking Staubach in front of teammates, questioning whether the quarterback could still lead them to glory. He taunted that Staubach was too old, too conservative, too predictable. For Staubach, who commanded respect through discipline, this was heresy. It wasn't just a personal attack, it was a direct challenge to the unity of the team. One infamous moment sealed their divide. During Super Bowl XIII against the Steelers, Henderson's reckless focus on showmanship, including taunting Pittsburgh players during warm-ups, drew unwanted attention. Staubach, locked into the biggest game of the year, saw Henderson's antics as a betrayal of preparation and focus. The Cowboys lost in heartbreaking fashion. And the whispers began, was Henderson more interested in being a celebrity than a champion? The quarterback and the linebacker never exchanged public insults, but the silence spoke volumes. Staubach, the ultimate team-first leader, never forgave the distractions Henderson brought into the locker room. Henderson, meanwhile, resented Staubach's image as untouchable. believing that Captain America received praise while his own brilliance was dismissed as arrogance. It was a cultural divide that could never be bridged. In later years, Henderson admitted that he felt like an outsider next to Staubach's clean-cut heroism. He said the quarterback was everything Dallas wanted the world to see, while he was everything the team wanted to hide. It was a truth that haunted him, because no matter how many tackles he made, no matter how many headlines he grabbed, Roger Staubach was the face of the franchise. Henderson was the shadow. Larger than life, but never trusted. Cold truth. Staubach moved into legend, remembered as one of the greatest leaders in football history. Henderson was left as the cautionary tale, the star who burned too bright. The rivalry was never about touchdowns or interceptions. It was about two visions of what the Cowboys could be. One survived. The other was consumed by the fire. #3. Hollywood versus Terry Bradshaw. If Tom Landry was the authority and Roger Staubach the saint, then Terry Bradshaw was the rival showman who exposed Hollywood Henderson's most destructive habits. The Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers were mirror images of each other in the 1970s. Both dynasties, both champions, both fighting for the right to call themselves the true team of the decade. Henderson's feud with Bradshaw was born on the grandest stage, and it became one of his defining scars. Bradshaw was never known for elegance, but for toughness. He was blunt, country, and unafraid of critics. Henderson, already spinning into arrogance, saw him as an easy target. Before Super Bowl XIII in Miami, Henderson mocked Bradshaw in a way that stunned the sports world. On national television, he called him so dumb he couldn't spell cat if you spotted him the C and the A. It wasn't just trash talk, it was humiliation, aimed at the quarterback who had already beaten Dallas in a previous Super Bowl. For Henderson, it was Hollywood flair. For Bradshaw, it was fuel. The game itself became a war of egos. Henderson flew around the field, determined to back up his words. But Bradshaw rose higher. He threw for 4 touchdowns, won MVP, and walked away with the Lombardi Trophy. Every touchdown felt like a direct reply to Henderson's insult. The cameras found Bradshaw smiling, Henderson fuming, and the Steelers celebrating what would go down as one of the greatest Super Bowls ever played. For Henderson, it was a night where the spotlight he craved became the light that burned him. The fallout was devastating. Henderson's words overshadowed his performance. Instead of remembering his speed and coverage, fans remembered his insult. Bradshaw, often criticized as a quarterback who wasn't smart enough, used that very narrative to craft his legend. He became the symbol of resilience, while Henderson became the symbol of reckless bravado. The feud had crossed beyond the field. It had become cultural. Bradshaw, the small-town boy who embraced humility, had embarrassed Hollywood, the city-light linebacker, who thought he could outshine anyone. In later years, Henderson admitted regret. He said the insult was born of cocaine and arrogance, a line he thought would make him famous but instead chained him to a caricature. Bradshaw, for his part, didn't need to hold a grudge. The victories were enough. Every highlight of Super Bowl XIII was proof that words mean little when the scoreboard tells the truth. And yet the sting for Henderson never disappeared. Every time Bradshaw's legacy grew, Henderson's wound deepened. Cold truth. Henderson gave Bradshaw one of his greatest triumphs. Bradshaw gave Henderson one of his deepest scars. The rivalry was not just a Super Bowl memory. It was the moment Hollywood Henderson's name became infamous for his mouth, not his mastery. And he never escaped that shadow. #2. Hollywood versus himself. The fourth hidden truth was not an enemy in another uniform, nor a coach in a fedora, nor even a teammate with an opposite image. The greatest rival Thomas Henderson ever faced was himself. Every step of his career, the war inside him was louder than the cheers outside. Fame gave him a crown. Cocaine took it away. By the late 1970s, Henderson was no longer just a linebacker. He was a celebrity in Dallas, appearing in magazines, speaking on talk shows, flaunting wealth and charisma. He loved the cameras, and the cameras loved him. But away from the bright lights, he spiraled into a pattern of excess. Cocaine became his secret companion, the powder that promised energy, confidence, and escape. What began as a habit at parties turned into a chain that controlled him on game days. The evidence showed in his performances. Some weeks, he was unstoppable, flying across the field with speed unmatched by any linebacker in the league. Other weeks, he was erratic, missing assignments, showing up unfocused, angering teammates and coaches. The inconsistency was not talent fading. It was discipline collapsing under the weight of addiction. Henderson later admitted he sometimes carried cocaine in his uniform, a shocking revelation that showed how deep the chaos had sunk. The defining moment came in 1979, when his lifestyle could no longer be hidden. He was arrested, suspended, and ultimately released from the Cowboys, the very team that had once believed he was their future. For Landry, Staubach, and the entire franchise, Henderson had become a liability too big to contain. The fall was brutal. From the heights of Super Bowls, he was cast into exile, drifting from one team to another, his talent drowned in the haze of addiction. Fans who once wore his number now whispered his name as a warning. He was no longer Hollywood, the glamorous star. He was Henderson, the wasted talent. And yet, in this war against himself, there was more than destruction. There was survival. After hitting rock bottom, Henderson was forced to confront the truth that no rival could defeat him as completely as he could defeat himself. Years later, after prison, after rehab, he began to rebuild. He became a symbol, not of glory, but of redemption. He admitted his sins, told his story to warn others, and used the very spotlight that once blinded him to shine light on the dangers of drugs. He lived to see 71, a survivor in a league where many never made it past 40. Cold truth. Henderson's deadliest rival was the man in the mirror. Fame and cocaine nearly killed him. Redemption saved him. But the scars remain, carved into a legacy where brilliance and self-destruction could never be separated. Showdown. Hollywood versus the legacy of America's team. The final hidden truth was not about one man. It was about the weight of a myth. Thomas Henderson did not just battle coaches, quarterbacks, or demons within. His greatest clash was with the very idea of America's team, the Dallas Cowboys themselves. To be a Cowboy in the 1970s was to become part of a brand larger than football. The Silver Star was more than a logo. It was a promise of discipline, unity, and perfection. Henderson never fit inside that frame, and his story became the crack in the picture Dallas wanted to show the world. The Cowboys thrived on image. Tom Landry's stoic face, Roger Staubach's clean-cut heroism, the cheerleaders symbolizing glamour without scandal. Every Sunday, the team broadcasted order and grace to millions of televisions across America. Into this machine walked Henderson, a man who embodied the opposite. He was loud, flamboyant, unpredictable. He was the piece that didn't match the puzzle. And yet for a time, he made the picture even brighter. Hollywood brought an energy that turned defense into theater. But theater was dangerous for a team built on silent discipline. By 1978, Henderson had become the star fans could not ignore, and that made him dangerous to the carefully crafted image of the Cowboys. He lived publicly in a way the franchise despised. Headlines about his parties overshadowed headlines about victories. Reporters who once praised his speed began asking about his cocaine use. Every time Henderson stepped out in silk suits or shouted into microphones, the Cowboys' mask of perfection slipped a little. He wasn't just a linebacker anymore. He was a threat to the mythology. The breaking point came with Super Bowl 13. The Cowboys were favored, the dynasty poised for another jewel in its crown. Yet Henderson's taunts and antics turned the spotlight onto chaos. When the Steelers won, Dallas's empire of order looked vulnerable. Landry's quiet authority and Staubach's heroism were no longer the full story. Hollywood Henderson, with his arrogance and his addiction, had shown the cracks in America's team. The myth was dented, and the franchise could never quite repair it. After his release, Henderson carried that stain. Dallas wanted to erase him, to pretend the Hollywood chapter was just a mistake. But history does not erase. Fans remembered. Reporters remembered. Henderson himself remembered. For decades, the Cowboys prided themselves on discipline and control. Yet one of their brightest stars had exposed the truth. Even America's team could bleed. Even the perfect image had shadows. Henderson wasn't just rebelling against rules. He was rebelling against a system that demanded he be something he was not. Years later, when Henderson spoke about his career, he often returned to this point. He admitted he loved the Cowboys. But he also admitted he could never belong to the myth. He was too real, too raw, too broken. The legacy of America's team rejected him. But in doing so, it proved he had left his mark. He forced Dallas to show that behind the silver star, players were human, flawed, and vulnerable. In that sense, Henderson's greatest rivalry was not against a person, but against the dream itself. Cold truth. Henderson never conquered the Cowboys' myth, but the Cowboys never erased him. His fall became part of their legend. Hollywood Henderson was proof that even America's team had a hidden truth it could not hide. Hidden beneath the bigger wars with Landry, Staubach, and Bradshaw was another rivalry, quieter but just as telling, with fellow Cowboy star Tony Dorsett. Both men were lightning in a bottle. Dorsett was the sleek, unstoppable running back who gave Dallas glamour on offense, while Henderson provided flair on defense. On paper, they were teammates chasing the same dream. In reality, their personalities clashed like fire and gasoline. Dorsett was confident, sometimes cocky, but disciplined when the spotlight demanded it. Henderson, by contrast, never turned the spotlight off. The friction came from competition for attention. Dallas was big enough for stars, but the silver star on the helmet demanded unity. Dorsett believed Henderson's antics hurt the team. Henderson believed Dorsett played the role of star while secretly envying his fame. Teammates recalled moments in practice where verbal jabs turned personal, where Henderson mocked Dorsett's quiet nature, and Dorsett dismissed Henderson as reckless. The defining episode came in the locker room, after a loss in 1979. Henderson, frustrated and high, lashed out at teammates. Dorsett stood up, challenging him. Voices rose, and the confrontation nearly exploded before coaches intervened. It wasn't just a fight about a bad game. It was a clash between two men who represented different visions of glory. Dorsett's path led to the Hall of Fame. Henderson's path led to exile. Cold truth. Dorsett thrived within the Cowboys' system. Henderson burned against it. Their silent rivalry was never headlined. But it showed how, even within America's team, not all stars could shine together. Henderson's jealousy and Dorsett's discipline drew a line between survival and self-destruction. And once again, Henderson found himself on the wrong side of that line. Thomas Hollywood. Henderson's story is not one of simple wins and losses. It is a story woven with brilliance, arrogance, collapse, and survival. To understand his legacy, one must trace the threads of every rivalry, every grudge, and every hidden truth that shaped his rise and fall. From the streets of Austin to the grand stage of Super Bowl XIII, Henderson lived a life that was both magnetic and destructive. The kind of story that football rarely tells out loud. His rivalry with Tom Landry revealed the eternal clash between discipline and rebellion. Landry built the Cowboys on silence and order, while Henderson thrived on chaos and sound. Their war was not just about play calls or curfews. It was about the soul of a dynasty. Henderson's refusal to bend to Landry's system forced Dallas to admit that not every star could be molded. That fracture became part of the Cowboys' history, showing that even the most orderly empire had cracks in its foundation. His divide with Roger Staubach symbolized the cultural war of the era. Staubach was the Navy hero, a family man, the face parents could point to with pride. Henderson was nightlife, bravado, and drugs. Together, they represented the split between two Americas, the conservative values of tradition, and the rising wave of rebellion. Staubach left the game as a legend. Henderson left as a warning. Yet both together painted a complete portrait of what it meant to be a cowboy in the 1970s. The feud with Terry Bradshaw immortalized Henderson's mouth as much as his talent. That one insult, that one night, defined how millions remembered him. It showed how a few reckless words could shape destiny, turning a gifted linebacker into a punchline and elevating a rival quarterback into myth. Henderson became living proof that ego could overshadow excellence, that words could wound deeper than hits. Then came the battle with himself. No opponent, no coach, no rival inflicted as much damage as Henderson did to his own career. Cocaine nearly destroyed him, costing him games, teammates, and years of his prime. Yet within that darkness came his most remarkable survival. Unlike many who fell into the same spiral, Henderson lived to tell his story. His later years became an act of redemption, speaking openly about his addictions, helping others avoid the same traps, and proving that even fallen stars can shine again, if only in a different light. And finally, the myth of America's team itself. Henderson's greatest truth was that he never fit inside the Cowboys' carefully crafted image. Dallas wanted clean heroes and silent discipline. Henderson was noisy, imperfect, and impossible to contain. The Cowboys tried to erase him, but his story endured because it revealed something deeper. The perfect team was never perfect. The dynasty had shadows. Hollywood Henderson became that shadow. A man who showed the world that beneath the silver star were humans, flawed and fragile. His bonus rivalry with Tony Dorsett underscored the theme. Two stars on the same team, yet only one learned how to survive inside the system. Dorsett played within the lines and reached the Hall of Fame. Henderson painted outside the lines and nearly lost his life. Their contrast was the final lesson. In the NFL, talent alone is never enough. Discipline decides who endures. Today, Henderson stands at 71. A survivor of an era where many did not make it past middle age. He has trophies in memory, scars on his soul, and stories that echo louder than statistics. His career was short, his legacy complicated, but his impact undeniable. Beyond tackles and interceptions, Henderson forced football to look at its hidden truths. That dynasties have cracks. That heroes can fall. That brilliance can be devoured by ego. Cold truth. Henderson was never the legend Dallas wanted, but he was the legend football needed to remember. His life is a reminder that the golden age of the NFL was not only about trophies and parades, it was about the fragile line between glory and ruin. And Thomas Hollywood Henderson lived on both sides of that line. The story of Thomas Hollywood Henderson is more than a tale of football. It reflects the fragile balance between brilliance and destruction. He gave fans unforgettable moments of speed and swagger. He also gave them scandal, regret, and pain. Henderson lived too fast, but he also lived long enough to share his truths. Those truths remind us that every dynasty carries shadows, and every star carries scars. Now the question turns to you. Do you believe Henderson was undone by his own choices, or was he simply a man who could never survive inside the perfect image of America's team? Was his downfall the product of arrogance, or was it the price of being too real in a league built on myths? Which rivalry? Landry, Staubach, Bradshaw, Dorsett, or the battle within himself? Do you believe shaped his life the most? We want to hear your voice. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which hidden truth shocked you the most? Which part of his journey left the strongest impression on you? If this journey into football's past gripped you, there is more waiting. NFL Hidden Truths uncovers the untold stories, the rivalries that never died, and the secrets the league tried to hide. Subscribe and join us as we bring back the voices of legends, the echoes of stadiums, and the truths behind the myths. Beyond trophies and banners, beyond highlight reels and statistics, the real NFL lives in the scars, the betrayals, and the moments that shaped men. That is the story we tell here. Subscribe today. Be part of the journey. And never forget, every legend has a hidden truth.